Hello, I'm Charlie Brooker and you're watching Newswipe, a programme all about what's been happening, like this. Police caught out by 150-year-old invention called photography. Newscast from old Godzilla movie announces glorious missile launch orchestrated by Yoda. And brave crew managed to expel unwanted seamen.
Latest reports suggest they've now beaten off the pirates.
But we're not starting with that, we're starting here.
You know how nerve-wracking it can be hosting a party.
First you sit around wondering if anyone's going to show up. And then when they do, you've suddenly got to deal with all these disparate groups of bloody friends who've never met before, and you have to make bloody small talk with them all until you lose all sense of your own identity. And then the nerves get to you and you drink too much and you wind up making an embarrassing bloody spectacle of yourself.
Or is that just me? Anyway, the other week, Prime Minister Gordon Brown, or Prime Minister Gordon Brown as we like to call him, had to throw the most important party of his life, the G20 summit. In case you're wondering, the G20 actually consists of 29 of the world's largest economies, so it's good to see they can count.
Anyway, these 29 economic groups have banded together to refer to themselves by the gangster rap nickname of G.
Why? Because they think it makes them sound cool. It's grown in size over the years. Last time it was the G10, before that the G8, the G5, and of course the worst incarnation, G4, seen here turning TOTP into an audio blast of silage.
Look at the stars, look how they shine for you.
The point of the summit, of course, was to reach an international consensus on how to save the world from Money-geddon, the crisis no one really understands.
And they possibly don't really understand it because the experts wheeled out to explain it are so uneasy on the eye, it's hard to listen to what they're saying or even tell them apart.
Even Channel 4 News didn't know which ugly financial blood to cut to.
Hernando de Soto, where are you on fiscal stimulus?
Well, I think fiscal stimulus is something that has to be done.
And when they do cut to the right one, said expert tends to say something like, oh, it's very simple, and then immediately follow that up by saying something that doesn't make any sense to human ears.
It's very simple. The Bank of International Settlements recently said that they figured that there was about $1,200 trillion worth of this paper, which is a semi-liquid paper.
What does that mean? Even financial expert Will Hutton has to laugh nihilistically in the face of this madness. Come the big day itself, the news solved the problem of keeping the viewer interested in the notoriously dry and impenetrable subject of global macroeconomics in the simplest way possible, by not really bothering. Instead, it largely concerned itself with repeatedly coming in its pants about Saint and Saintess Obama. Every aspect of Barack's Guitar Hero World Tour was covered in breathless detail.
First, GMTV told us he'd arrive in a flurry of bad clip art.
This is like an old Amiga game or something. And Channel 4 News breathlessly pored over every detail of his Super Knight Rider-style Death Race 2000 mega car, the Beast.
On board the car they call the Beast, defence systems are said to include pump-action shotguns, night vision cameras and tear gas cannons.
This is basically hardcore pornography for people who really love cars.
The wheels are reportedly Kevlar reinforced with steel rims to allow driving even without tyres.
Meanwhile, Downing Street did its best to impress Obama by rolling out the red carpet, even if it did take 5 British workmen to fit the thing.
As the next morning dawned, if you tuned into BBC Breakfast looking for local or travel news, you could just about fuck off.
If you've just joined us, you're waiting to see your local news and travel summary, then apologies, but we are following the breaking news story.
Because they were busy training their cameras on a road St Obama might glide down any moment.
But didn't.
Now they snuck out somehow. Well, they must have an invisibility cloak or something like that, I should think.
Then there was a series of photo opportunities in which Brown tried to gesticulate in a commanding way.
Oh, yes, if I wave my hand over here, I'll look like a man with vision. And now I'm pointing, which is all leaderly and stuff.
That was followed by a quick press conference stroke mutual blowjob contest.
This sort of resembled a deleted podium love scene from Brokeback Mountain.
Your first 70 days in office have changed America.
Yeah.
And you've changed America's relationship with the world.
Oh, you're wonderful, Obama. Wonderful. Oh.
You're to be congratulated because you have shown extraordinary energy and leadership and initiative in laying the groundwork for this summit.
No, we're both wonderful. Oh, I wish I knew how to quit you. Oh, let's just go off and have a little wrestle, eh? Oh.
Soon after Brown and Barack bigged up the G20, a cloud appeared on the horizon as German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French PM Nicolas Sarkozy, who's been up a supermodel yet still seems angry, called a press conference of their own with a slightly more negative hue.
This largely consisted of whinging in exotic languages the BBC clearly hadn't expected them to use.
Languages like German and French.
Präsidentschaft auch seitens der Europäischen Union gefordert wurde.
It seems that we may have to leave that for the moment.
Fortunately, before long the BBC found a translator, a lady who could undermine Nicolas Sarkozy in an amusing way by giving him a female voice.
Well, we're not pointing fingers. We're not fingering anyone.
Well, that's not very French.
The next day brought the cosmetically boring yet important business of the G20 summit itself, held in the glamorous surroundings of the Sexy XL Centre in London's Docklands. Actually, is it just me, or does this footage make it look worryingly like the War Room from Stanley Kubrick's marvellous apocalyptic satire Dr. Strangelove?
That is precisely the idea.
Disappointingly, Sarkozy didn't storm out going honky, as we'd been warned. In fact, it was the dullest party ever. Faced with that tedium, thank God for the saintly depiction of God's wife, Michelle Obama.
The news just couldn't get enough of her.
Now, Michelle Obama's been in Britain for barely 36 hours, but it seems the nation has already fallen in love with her. Once again, she was the belle of the ball as she outshone the other First Ladies at a Downing Street dinner last night. There she is, looking gorgeous. She just gets it right every time, Michelle Obama.
Obama, you know, Barack, I don't know who I fancy more.
She wears so many vibrant colours, which, again, is very brave, isn't it?
But it's a joy.
Oh, why don't you both just kiss her while I watch from inside a cupboard?
Sky were all over Michelle Magdalen's visit to a school in Islington to heal the world by hugging it better, one photo opportunity at a time. This was so inspiring, the blessed receivers of the Bicep One's embrace were called to the studio the next day to relive the moment.
What was she like?
She was absolutely amazing.
She really was. She was really pretty and warm and loving and welcoming and so nice.
Anyway, once the party itself was over, what had been decided? Well, no fiscal stimulus agreement, but there was some blah about clamping down on tax havens, some regulation and anti-protectionist promises.
Oh, and a bit of half-hearted whiffle about the environment, which means we're probably all going to die. Still, the main headline was that $1.1 trillion was going to the IMF to help prevent developing nations and Iceland from collapsing. This was sort of good news for Gordon Brown, who could try and claim it as a victory, so he did.
This is the day that the world came together.
Yeah, on an economic biscuit. And then it was all over, apart from news footage of world leaders bagging themselves a fantastic Facebook profile snap in a group shot.
Although the group shot actually had to be taken twice. First because the Canadian PM went off for a piss, and then because Italian PM Berlusconi went off for a shit out the window into the Thames like a horse. Anyway, for Gordon Brown at least, the G20 will chiefly be remembered for giving him a short-lived popularity boost.
Brown gets a bounce from the G20 summit.
Ah, brown poll, I see, it says there on the screen. Nothing funny there, I'm just pointing it out. It says brown poll on the screen. Brown poll. Brown poll.
Lots of important things have happened recently, but we're not going to look at them right now. We're going to look at the week in bullshit. Money-geddon! And having failed to depress the nation to death with Dermot's economic cycle a few weeks back, Sky News unveiled their new tactic, Recession Day, starring a demoralising on-screen meter showing how deep in the shit we are.
Well, you can see it there at the bottom of your screen, our debt counter getting on for £39 million. Oh dear.
And regular updates from Sky faces stationed around the country to show how wretched everything is.
The end result was the most depressing broadcast since that Alan Yentob series about the guitar.
The unrelenting misery kicked off with Eamon Holmes conducting the gloomiest interviews ever.
What does it feel like to struggle?
I hate it. I really do hate it.
Oh, this is fun, isn't it? I'm glad I tuned in.
Why do you hate it? How does it make you feel?
Frustrated and angry.
Oh, God.
Do you feel abandoned? I mean, tell me what that's like to wake up in the morning. You're a dad.
Yeah.
You look at your little baby there. You obviously can't provide what you want to provide. What does that feel like?
Oh, already this is like being trapped in a coffin, hearing rainwater seeping through the cracks. And it's only 16 minutes past 8 in the morning.
It's hard. Really hard.
Next, Dermot Murnahan was sent to Coventry to sing a song of financial woe.
The anthem to recession was even written by Coventry's most famous band.
This storm is coming like a ghost storm.
Just to make things worse, alongside the economic tragedy, the rest of the surrounding news that day was grim too.
Kay Burley did her best to lighten things up, but it didn't really work. In fact, it ended up being one of the most awkward segues I've ever seen.
A body has been found, we're told,
within the last few moments. So we'll get more on that. I'll be telling you more also about why I'm standing in a kitchen.
Turns out she was standing there to do sad interviews about the recession. She also killed time wearing a Sontaran costume, talking to some old people, patronising a small man.
You didn't expect to be on the telly, did you?
No.
And dishing out sexual innuendo to a sweep.
I bet you've cleaned one or two posh chimneys in your time, haven't you?
The day dragged on, with one instance of grinding recessionary despair after another.
I don't know. It's just never going to end.
By the end of the day, it was also dispiriting. Even Jeremy Thompson needed a pint to steady his nerves on air.
203 million. That's what the government is racked up in debt today.
Sky actually left the debt counter running for several days until they gave up trying to work out how much it had racked up.
1 billion and loads.
Now, health is one of the most important things you have, unless you own a really expensive car. But can you trust what the news has to say about health and science? Well, the Daily Express recently claimed that breathing in can give you a heart attack. But what does a real doctor think? Here's journalist Dr. Ben Goldacre of the Bad Science column with his view on the MMR scandal. It's his view.
How journalists decide on what makes a good science story has got very little to do with what's true or what's actually got any evidence behind it. I think the media's greatest ever science hoax has been the MMR story, something which they almost invented entirely for themselves.
The vaccine for measles, mumps and rubella, which is given to most children over the age of 1, has been linked with autism.
What was interesting about Andrew Wakefield's paper in 1998 is it was a case series report. It's a perfectly valid kind of thing to do, but it's just a collection of 12 anecdotes written up in a single paper. That can't tell you anything about a link between MMR and autism, simply because MMR and autism are both very common. So to find a few kids who've had both MMR and then gone on to develop autism isn't very special. I mean, that's extraordinary behaviour on the part of the media to selectively only cover dubious, worrying evidence whilst totally ignoring all of the reassuring stuff that was fully published. That even when they're trying to produce sensible news coverage, they still insist on doing everything in the most frightening way they can.
In 15 minutes, 200 of you emailed us about the vaccine. It's only a straw poll, but 182 of you expressed concern or confusion.
If you talk to journalists and say, why did you go to town on this evidence that was clearly not supporting the hypothesis that MMR causes autism, all they will ever say to you is, well, there was an expert from a medical school telling us that this was true. Proper scientists with a good publication record of doing sensible work were publishing exactly the same kind of research, but showing negative results, and they were completely ignored. That was because the story had become a political story more than a science story. MMR kicked off properly in 2002 when a little boy called Leo Blair became old enough to have the MMR vaccine.
He still won't confirm that his son Leo has had the triple vaccine.
They said at the time that this was because of privacy concerns, that we must respect their right to privacy, an argument which is slightly undermined by the fact that Cherry Blair has now since written in her autobiography about the actual fuck which conceived the child. Once the story became about Leo Blair, it was suddenly the domain of generalist journalists, the glamorous, more famous columnists, the people who normally would be telling us about a very funny thing the au pair said on the way to a dinner party, were suddenly giving the nation incredibly complex health advice on matters of immunology and epidemiology. Andrew Wakefield's up in front of the GMC and an entire nation of journalists are queuing up to blame him, one man, as the scapegoat for their crimes. And that just goes to show, really, how little they understand their role in all of this.
For his supporters, Andrew Wakefield is a hero, and despite prompting a major health scare, he seemed unrepentant.
No regrets, thank you.
The journalists' fantasy about MMR causing autism has run for 10 solid years.
As a concerned citizen, there are a million ways to get your voice heard. You can shout out of the window, you can share every thought that zips through your bonds with a million like-minded twits on Twitter, or you can get your own low-budget BBC 4 show and sit monotonously blarping words down the lens over and over again until all the viewers at home switch over to something more entertaining, such as Andy Dick senselessly killing a dog or something. But useful though all these platforms are, chances are no one's going to take your message seriously until you gather like-minded people together and march through a major city in your thousands, waving placards and chanting slogans. Protests are effective, that's why the Iraq War never happened.
Of course, sometimes demonstrations turn unpleasant, which is bad news for public order, but a veritable bonanza for news networks and the press. Recently, as those world leaders gathered in London for that G20 party, the news excitedly prepared us for the biggest display of public dissent in years.
Not just the biggest, but the most varied too.
There was a protest for just about everything: anti-capitalism, anti-carbon trading, anti-war, anti-wasps, you name it.
In fact, there were so many protesters, Newsnight had to provide a guide to who they were.
There were knackered-looking pacifists, the lead singer from the Flaming Lips, the most earnest man in the world, and an anarchist professor.
We are not protesting. We are overthrowing the government.
Yeah, though he seemed a tad less ominous than that when you saw him going down a kiddie slide.
So there you go, a varied bunch, but still the news was worried.
In fact, given the tone of some of the preemptive coverage in the press, you could have been forgiven for thinking everyone was marching in favour of simply smashing everything in the world to bits.
There were also stories about bankers being told to dress down, although not everyone in the city seemed that bothered.
So in no sense will you allow this protest to stop you coming to work?
I shall try not to.
Where do you work? The 1930s?
GMTV kept its viewers informed with a helpful VT in which benevolent, stereotypical, crusty environmental types stood around in front of a peace flag, patiently responding to questions about potential trouble.
We hope that, a lot of people come together and create a lot of change.
Not very scary, really. Still, at least they didn't try to oomph things up by slapping together a montage of violent-looking protest material backed with "I Predict a Riot" by the Kaiser Chiefs.
They also interviewed this climate change protester who said,
"With the situation of climate change being as urgent as it is and as important as it is, we do think it is acceptable to sometimes break the law."
Now, I think when she talks about breaking laws there, she's actually referring to the environmental protesters' plan to erect a little temporary tent city in the street. But GMTV's John Stapleton seemed to take it as a violent anarchist mission statement, a point he repeatedly put to Mark Barrett of the G20 Alliance.
Well, you were saying let's have a peaceable protest, but as you saw from that young lady at the end there, that's not likely to be the case. There are people going there intent on causing trouble.
Well, to be fair to that lady at the end, she represents the climate camp, and they're very much a peaceful movement, and they're all about practical solutions.
But she accepts violence may take place.
She didn't say violence. She said that.
Oh, Stapleton's a tit, isn't he?
To get the ideas into the public realm, sometimes we have to do something that's a little bit different.
So I come back to my point, violence may occur.
It's admirable of GMTV to have hired a totally deaf host.
But you know as well as I do that on some websites that there are people advocating, quote, burn a banker, causing mayhem.
Yeah.
You can't justify that. You must accept there is the risk, given the numbers involved and given the sort of language that's been used by some of the people, not you personally, but other people, there is a real risk of this turning into mayhem, lockdown in the city, and, monumental cost to taxpayers.
Still, in case you weren't put off by all the continued references to potential violence, then hooray!
Yes, because as well as dire warnings, the papers and the news bulletins were jam-packed with helpful step-by-step advertising campaigns showing precisely where, when and how the massive bloody rucks they were predicting would take place.
OK, so we start there.
We'll move across the City of London.
And go there.
Congregate at the Bank of England.
And then it kicks off there.
Saturday brought a Put People First march in which charity supporters, churchgoers, concerned citizens and Carol of Big Brother 8 demanded an end to all unpleasantness. The news networks covered this patiently.
This passed off peacefully, but never mind, everyone knew Wednesday was going to be the real flashpoint.
Come Financial Fool's Day itself, the rolling news stations leapt into action, prepared to cover every aspect of the demonstrations. Windows were boarded up in preparation, the news media assembled, the horsemen of the apocalypse cantered into view, and the violence began. Not.
In fact, it all seemed rather cheerful for a while. It was all a bit Glastonbury.
Adding to the epic festival vibe, Sky News cracked out the Skycopter, which hovered around all day, zooming in on anything that looked vaguely troublesome, a bit like a gorilla picking through a mate's fur for uppity lice.
But why stop with commanding the air when you can also throw live to the Skyboat? Not the riverboat, no, the Skyboat, which is like a riverboat, but with a rather lost-looking poor sod standing in the middle of it.
And you can probably see the first of what looks like banners from the protesters. That, of course, the south end of the bridge. We're right in the middle of the river.
Wow, what a vantage point that's not.
They also had Ian Woods on the ground in his Sky shoes. He was moving through the crowd a bit like an uptight businessman character wandering through a psychedelic party in a happening 60s movie. A movie complete with unexpected celebrity cameos. Hang on, wait a minute, is that, it's
Russell Brand.
That's it.
Protests.
Yes, the nation's favourite bearded lexicographer and sex machine had arrived and was already scanning his surroundings for fresh granddaughters to fuck.
Russell, you're live on Sky News at the moment. Can you just explain why you've come here today? Which issue angers you?
I ain't angry.
Oh, aren't you? OK. Tell us about your dinkle.
So why come?
I live here.
Well, I thought you lived in Ponderland. By now the crowds were building and the air began to turn. One of Sky's correspondents got so excited he ejaculated while on the phone to Dermot Murnahan.
Okay. Alistair Bungle there, somewhere within that crowd. He was just telling us his come.
Shortly afterwards, Tony Benn, who was about to go on an anti-war march to Trafalgar Square, offered Dermot a little editorial advice.
The coverage of this, if I may make a suggestion to you, would be to try to cover some of the speeches made today. Otherwise, if it's just described as demonstrations, scuffles, police, traffic, no one outside will really know what it's really about.
Yeah, whatever, Tony. He's kicking off down the road.
Yeah, a little later, things started looking a touch more feisty, although some of the assembled pundits initially seemed to find it all rather comical.
And here we are with scenes which, by and large, are more reminiscent of carry-on camping.
Around this point, a bit of genuine ugliness occurred.
Sky captured a sort of ninja protester hitting police with a pole and another man who appeared to receive a blow to the head. Bleeding from a wound, he moved forward to repeatedly shout at the police.
There's a young man quite clearly goading the police. He's getting very worked up indeed.
Shouty McHeadwound Man was destined to become the first iconic image of the protest.
This seems to be the ringleader at the moment, very keen to get to the front.
Clearly this wasn't very nice, but even while this was going on, just a short distance away, things were so relaxed, Sky's Ian Woods was looking downright bored. Although maybe things had calmed down because the police had deployed a giant.
Meanwhile, on the BBC, there was a chance to see a small group of people possessed by demons and take a look at some exciting anti-establishment graffiti.
Now, if you just take a quick look behind me on the walls of the Bank of England, I think you can probably see where protesters have been scrawling graffiti, slogans like money is for losers and property is theft.
And stop the bullshit. Go back, it said stop the bullshit. Go on, read it out.
A bit later after that, a few headstrong protesters, who the police had kettled in near an undefended branch of the Royal Bank of Scotland, started smashing windows.
Predictably, this became the second iconic image of the protests. It was certainly captured on enough cameras. Honestly, with all the lenses swarming around, you'd have thought Paris Hilton's vagina was smashing the bank up. Despite these flurries of violence, while it was happening, the reporters were still keen to get across how peaceful the majority of the demonstration was. Having said that, they still didn't really broadcast those speeches Tony Benn was so keen on. They got mentioned in split screen, but that was about it. Compare that with the scene a few days later where speeches from Jade Goody's funeral ceremony were broadcast at length.
You made me feel so special and soothed away my fears.
But then she's famous, what are you going to do? Anyway, as far as the protests went, throughout the day, the news did a fair job of contrasting the ugly bits with the more pleasant bits, especially from the skyboat where it was completely tranquil.
There's been very little to show that there's even been a demonstration here. If Richie just points up at the building, you can see that there's the Smash Capitalism banner that's been up there all day. But apart from that, absolutely nothing else.
By the evening bulletins, however, something had changed.
The events of the day had to be compressed, which meant even as the voiceover pointed out the majority of the protesters were peaceful.
Meanwhile, in the city, one branch of RBS takes the brunt of what are mainly peaceful protests.
These sensational pictures left a different impression.
And of course, Shouty McHeadwound Man got a thorough airing.
His confrontational moment in the spotlight was repeated again and again and again.
Why, he was an overnight sensation.
Already he's appearing on T-shirts, being profiled in glossy upbeat celebrity magazines, and hey, everyone's doing the Shouty McHeadwound dance!
This seems to be the ringleader at the moment, very keen to get to the front, get to the front. There's a young man quite clearly goading the police there.
The cat is bleeding quite heavily from his head as well.
Very keen to get to the front.
Obviously, dynamic images like these are going to drown out the voice of the peaceful majority every time, confirming the prejudice of many observers in the process.
That's certainly what happened across the pond, where on fair and balanced Fox News, turtle-faced unfunny man Bill O'Reilly shared his opinion of the protesters.
Authorities estimate about 4,000 loons are roaming around London right now. Some of them trying to cause trouble as President Obama and other world leaders are trying to right the economy.
Shouty McHeadwound man!
From what we've seen, there are basically three groups of loons. Anti-capitalists who want universal communism, environmental extremists who have a litany of complaints, and anti-war folks who want to give peace a chance while bin Laden and his crew cut off people's heads.
The next day, a huge protest at the Excel Centre itself turned out to be a damp squib. But never mind, because the papers were full of predictable headlines and images of the previous day's violence.
And buried away within, a few reports on what looked like, in news terms, a small story. It got a few scant mentions, usually alongside talk of brave police medics doing their job under difficult conditions. And here was the irony. At a public event granted absolute saturation coverage with all the press photographers, live feed images, skycopters, preposterous skyboats and all, the news had missed perhaps the most important image of the day.
In the end, it took some old-fashioned investigative reporting and a member of the public to bring this image to the nation's attention. Disturbing footage of a man being pushed over by the police. Shortly afterwards, he died of a heart attack.
In capturing this, the member of the public, ironically a New York fund manager, was technically breaking a law introduced on February the 16th, making it illegal to photograph the police. And so was the civilian who took this charming snap, appearing to show a police medic in action. Maybe the baton's full of medicine.
On top of that, just before this episode went to air, new alarming mobile phone footage came to light from the following day, appearing to show a policeman striking a female protester. In summary, this varied assembly of concerned citizens, some earnest, some violent, some daft, failed to get its voice heard with much coherence, and in the end the story became not about capitalism or climate change, but the succession of ugly images. The G20 demos didn't just inspire the news, they've also inspired a short little poem from our verse correspondent Tim Key.
Right, so this is a poem about the protests on April the 1st, you know, when everyone went down and it all kicked off a bit in the city. Petal got some metal and smashed a window. Anil threw his flannel. He's a Hindu. I suppose it's about the... everyone was doing it, you know, everyone just went down there. Hindus, Christians, skinheads, black, yellow, pink, grey, blue, everyone get down there, and as long as you hate the police and banks, you're away.
Music and an exciting technical leap forward for everyone.
How would you like to see your favourite band play live right there in your living room?
Oh, imagine it, the Beatles, the Sex Pistols playing live in my living room. Oh, please tell me that dream's a little bit nearer today.
That dream is a little bit nearer today.
Yeah!
After Keane played the world's first 3D webcast.
Oh, shit, I hate this f***ing world.
Yes, Keane, no one's favourite theatre-middling ploddy indie shit-spreaders, rocked the internet mildly with a gig that brought their two-dimensional music kicking and screaming into the three-dimensional realm. And you can see here just how exciting it was.
Wow, it's like the disappointment is happening right in front of my face.
Well, that's all we've got time for this evening. Go away.
Next tonight on BBC4, Hugh Dennis is Marcus Brigstock's willing victim in another episode of I've Never Seen Star Wars. And he's got some particularly trying challenges in store. Roadkill, anyone? Well, rather Hugh than me.